Here's a lovely family portrait of George Clooney, Taylor Swift, and their 2 children. Obviously, that's not really a thing. But it can be, if you know how to get exactly what you want out of your AI image generator. I'm using Stable Diffusion Automatic 1111 Web GUI, so I'll be explaining my technique using that. I happen to be using Reliberate as a model for this image, though that isn't really as important for the technique. I also use the ControlNet extension and the Region Prompter extension, which are all but essential if you want absolute precise control over your images. So, here's what I did to generate this image. Hopefully the techniques here will be useful and inspire you to up your AI image game. First, I load a reference photo into ControlNet for the pose and composition of the image. I often use a depth mask in ControlNet, but in this particular case I got better results using Soft Edge. It did a better job with stuff like hand positions. I'm looking to use very precise direction, so I chose my prompt is more important in the control mode. I also set the control weight a little lower than the default one. Everything else I left as defaults. And that's fine, but it doesn't let you be super specific in your prompting for each part of the image, which is where Region Prompter comes in. Initially I divided the template up into 4, but found that it wasn't really enough given the blank space at either side of the image, and did odd things with my prompts. Specifically, it absolutely refused to render Taylor Swift. So I made it 6 columns, so I could leave the first and last column entirely blank. I set it to use common prompt, and use common negative prompt. And this is what allows the magic to happen. Here's my prompt, note the break commands, which denote the columns I defined. So the first line is the common prompt we set it to use. A group portrait in a studio environment, with some other direction on the look and feel of the image. We then break and put nothing, the first column will be empty. We then break again and describe the first person in our image, George and Taylor's lovely 14-year-old daughter. Another break later we describe their 12-year-old son in similarly precise detail. Then we describe George, break, and then Taylor. Then we break and leave the rest blank. So, in the description of the boy and girl, you'll see that I've used square brackets and a number. That refers to the ratio of sampling steps before it switches from the first instruction to the second instruction. So, in this 30-step render, with a ratio of 0.5, the girl will start as Taylor Swift, then continue as George Clooney halfway through. Starting as Taylor ensures she has an overall girl look, even though she'll then take on some characteristics of George for the second half of the render. Dictating her age effectively deages the 2 halves of those instructions. Same for the boy, with the genders switched. I did a similar thing with some of the clothing, because it had a tendency to ignore what I was describing. So I forced it. The ratio is simply an emphasis of the importance of the keyword or phrase. There was one more step to creating a clean image here, which came from the fact that in almost every image I rendered, it insisted on drawing an extra arm on Taylor, failing to recognize that her hand is on George's shoulder. So I sent the best render to InPaint, masked out her extra arm, and simply prompted red dress. The end result is pretty much exactly what I set out to achieve. Between ControlNet and regional prompting, and sometimes brute force prompting, you can exactly specify what goes where in your image.